am delighted to be back with you in this great association, doing something that makes sense and makes money. And I very much appreciate this opportunity to stimulate your discussions by offering a strategic context for the larger energy shifts of which district energy, cogeneration, microgrids will be an important part. Those shifts are already well underway, and they may change some of your economic and perhaps your policy assumptions. The work I'll describe is specifically for the United States, but very widely adaptable and adoptable in other countries, even very different countries. It comes from an ambitious $6 million year-and-a-half exercise that 60 colleagues and I undertook at our Think and Do tank. We also enjoyed extensive industry contributions to both content and peer review. And the results are presented in a business book called Reinventing Fire, which came out last autumn. The underlying analysis is fully described at reinventingfire.com. There's a summary at TED.com, a summary talk with graphics similar to what you're about to see. And there's also a 13-page summary in the March-April issue of Foreign Affairs. Those URLs will be on my last slide. In America, we have a rather odd public conversation about energy, and if it were clearly stated, it would boil down to this question: would you rather die of A, oil wars, or B, climate change, or C, nuclear holocaust, or D, all of the above? Oh, I missed one. Or E, none of the above. That's the choice we're seldom offered. What if we could make energy do our work without working our undoing? Could we imagine fuel without fear? Could we reinvent fire? Fire, you see, made us human. Fossil fuels made us modern. And now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. That's now possible. In fact, it works better and costs less than what we have been doing. So let's see how that would work. 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning every year 4 cubic miles of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. As a member of the National Petroleum Council, I should emphasize that those fossil fuels have built our civilization, created our wealth, enriched the lives of billions. But they also have rising costs to our security, economy, health, and environment that are eroding, if not outweighing, their benefits. So we need a new fire. And switching from the old fire to the new fire changes two big stories: oil and electricity, each of which now puts 2/5 of the fossil carbon in the air. They're quite distinct. Our electricity comes less than 1% from oil, 42% from coal. But their uses are similarly concentrated. 3/4 of our oil fuels transport, 3/4 of our electricity runs buildings. The rest of both runs factories, so very efficient vehicles, factories, and buildings can save oil and coal and natural gas that can displace both of them. But today's energy system is not just inefficient. It is also disconnected, dirty, aging, and insecure. It needs refurbishment. By 2050, though, it could become efficient, connected, and distributed with elegantly frugal autos and factories and buildings, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. So we can eliminate our addiction to oil and coal by 2050 and use 1/3 less natural gas while switching to efficient use and renewable supplies. By 2050, this could cost $5 trillion less in net present value than business as usual, assuming that carbon emissions and all other hidden costs are worth zero, a conservatively low estimate. Yet this cheaper energy system could support a 158% bigger U.S. economy, all without oil or coal, or for that matter, nuclear energy. Moreover, this transition would need no new inventions and no new federal taxes, mandates, subsidies, or laws, and running Washington gridlock. Let me say that again. I'm going to tell you how to get the United States completely off oil and coal by 2050, $5 trillion cheaper with no act of Congress led by business for profit. So this transition will be designed and led in the C-suite, not by K Street. It will use our most effective institutions, private enterprise, co-evolving with civil society, sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. And whether you care most about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or about national security, or about environmental stewardship and climate protection and public health, reinventing fire makes sense and makes money. General Eisenhower reputedly said that expanding the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by encompassing more options and more synergies. So in Reinventing Fire, we integrated all 4 energy-using sectors: transport, buildings, industry, and electricity. And we integrated 4 kinds of innovation, not just the usual 2, technology and public policy, but also 2 more powerful ones often left out, namely design, the way we combine technologies, and strategy, new business models, new competitive strategies. And those combinations yield a lot more than the sum of their parts, especially in creating deeply disruptive business opportunities. In truth, we would save a lot more than $5 trillion. For example, America burns oil costing about $2 billion a day, but its hidden costs paid not at the pump but through our taxes or incomes are at least $4 billion a day, or $1.5 trillion a year in 3 roughly equal parts. The first $500 billion a year is sucked out of our economy mainly by OPEC's monopoly pricing, which U.S. oil dependence makes possible. The second $500 billion a year comes from the volatility of oil prices, which of course whipsaws our whole economy. For 40 years, oil price spikes have preceded every recession. But I'm talking just about the daily yo-yo of oil prices, which imposes cost and risk on every oil user, and the market values that cost at about $500 billion a year. Then the third $500 billion a year is what we pay to keep military forces ready for Persian Gulf interventions. That's about 10 times what we pay to buy oil from the Persian Gulf, and it rivals total U.S. defense spending at the height of the Cold War. Oil is also finite. The Pentagon is preparing not to need any. The rest of us should too. We ought to get off it just to enhance our security and save money at the pump, even if oil's hidden cost didn't effectively triple the pump price and bring oil's total cost to our society above 1/6 of GDP. Plus, we haven't counted this yet, any damage to health, environment, global stability and development, or our nation's independence and reputation. Where to start? Well, our mobility fuel goes 3/5 to automobiles. So let's start by making autos oil-free. 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car is caused by its weight. And every unit of energy that we save at the wheels by reducing weight saves another 6 units we don't need to waste getting it to the wheels. So it saves altogether 7 units of fuel at the tank. Huge leverage. But for the past quarter century, epidemic obesity has made our 2-ton steel autos gain weight twice as fast as their drivers. Today, though, ultralight, ultra-strong materials like carbon fiber composites can make dramatic weight savings snowball and can make cars simpler and cheaper to build. Lighter, more slippery autos need less force to move them, so their engine gets smaller, and such vehicle fitness then makes electric autos affordable because their batteries or fuel cells get 2 or 3 times smaller, lighter, and cheaper. So their sticker price will fall to about today's level with far lower driving costs. Together, these innovations can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of essentially Victorian steel stamping and engine technologies to the steeply falling costs of three mutually reinforcing technologies in ultralight materials, their structural manufacturing, and electric propulsion. The sales can grow and costs can drop even faster with temporary feebates, that is, rebates for efficient new autos paid for by fees on inefficient ones. In its first 2 years, the biggest of 5 such European programs tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency. The resulting shift to electric autos is going to be as game-changing as shifting from small refinements in typewriters to the dramatic Moore's Law-driven gains in computers. Of course, computers and electronics are now America's biggest industry, while typewriter makers have vanished. So vehicle fitness opens a new automotive competitive strategy that doubles the expected oil savings over the next 40 years and makes affordable the electrification that can save the rest of the oil. America could lead this next automotive revolution. The current leader, though, is Germany. Last year, Volkswagen announced that next year they'll be producing this 230 mile a gallon or 1 liter per 100 kilometer carbon fiber plug-in hybrid. And BMW last year announced mid-volume production next year of this carbon fiber electric car. They confirmed that its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries, and their CEO said, "We do not intend to be a typewriter maker," as he could look across Munich to where Olympia used to make excellent typewriters. Audi claimed it's going to beat them both by a year. There are some interesting things the United States can bring to this party. I brought along a carbon cap, which a little spin-off that I used to chair made 7 years ago in 1 minute. And you can tell from the sound that it's extremely strong and stiff. This is kind of a big crowd, but I think if I get it back afterwards, we can pass it around. And don't worry about dropping it. It's tougher than titanium. Tom Friedman actually whacked it as hard as he could with a sledgehammer without scuffing it. So these techniques for making ultralight structures can scale to automotive speed and cost with aerospace performance. And if adopted throughout U.S. automaking, for example, they would save 4/5 of the capital that industry needs. They would save lives because these materials can absorb 6 to 12 times as much crash energy per kilogram as steel and do so more smoothly. And they would save oil equivalent to discovering 1.5 Saudi Arabias or half an OPEC by drilling in the Detroit Formation. A very prospective play. We haven't been drilling in all the right places. But those negabarrels under Detroit cost $18 a barrel, and they are all-American, carbon-free, and inexhaustible. Now, the same physics and the same business logic also apply to big vehicles. In the 5 years through 2010, Walmart became able to haul a load, a case, with 2/5 less fuel through smarter truck design and logistics. Just the technological improvements in heavy trucks can save ultimately 2/3 of the fuel. And when you combine those with the triple to quintuple efficiency airplanes now on drawing boards at places like Boeing and MIT and NASA, you can end up saving nearly $1 trillion net present value on the heavy vehicles. Today there's a military revolution in energy efficiency that's going to speed all of these civilian advances in light and heavy vehicles, land, sea, and air, much as military R&D in the past gave us things like the internet, the global positioning system, and the jet engine and microchip industries. Also, as we design and build vehicles better, we can also use them smarter. This is a graph of traffic congestion with the morning and evening rush hours. And if that were an electricity load shape, we would throw a lot of IT-enabled pricing and demand response and smart grid at it to try to flatten it out. But by not yet doing that for road traffic, we are saving wasting many billions of dollars a day in idle people, idle vehicles, and idle roads. But we needn't simply wait for the forecast doubling of driving. We can use 4 powerful techniques to cut out needless driving. We can charge real-time driving costs per mile, not per gallon. We can use smart IT to enhance public transit and empower car and ride sharing. We can allow and encourage lucrative smart growth real estate models so more people are already where they want to be and don't need to go somewhere else. And we can use IT to make traffic free flowing. And together, those four proven methods can give us the same or better access with 46 to 84% less driving, saving another $0.4 trillion, plus another $0.3 trillion from more productive use of trucks. So 40 years hence, a far more mobile U.S. economy, notice the activity levels up in the subtitle there, can use no oil. Saving or displacing each barrel for about 25 bucks instead of buying it for over 100 can save about $4 trillion in present value, counting all its hidden costs at zero, or about 3 times that if we actually count them. So to get mobility without oil, to phase out the oil, we can first get efficient and then switch fuels. And those 125 to 240 mile per gallon equivalent, 1 or 2 liter per 100 kilometer autos can use any mixture of hydrogen, electricity, or advanced biofuels. Trucks and airplanes can realistically use advanced biofuels or hydrogen. Trucks could even burn natural gas, but no vehicles will need oil. And any biofuels the U.S. might need, at most 3 million barrels a day, this orange wedge down at the bottom, could be made 2/3 from waste without displacing cropland and without harming soil or climate. In fact, we would be paying the farmers and ranchers for taking carbon out of the air and putting it back in tilth where it belongs. Our team speeds these oil savings by what we call institutional acupuncture. That is, where the business logic is congested, not flowing properly, we insert little needles in it to get it flowing, with partners from Ford to Walmart to the Pentagon. And in most of the 6 sectors that need to be transformed, this long transition is already well underway. Even 3 years ago, mainstream analysts were starting to see peak oil not in supply but in demand. And Deutsche Bank even forecast world oil use will peak around 2016. In short, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. But electrified autos don't need to add new burdens to the electricity system. Rather, when smart autos exchange electricity and information through smart buildings with smart grids, they're adding to the grid flexibility and storage to make it easier to integrate varying solar and wind power. So electrified autos actually make the auto and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately. And they also converge the oil transition, the oil story, with our second big story, which is about saving electricity and then making it differently. Those two changes, revolutions really, in electricity promise more numerous and diverse and profound disruptions than in any other sector. Because in electricity, we've got 21st century technology and speed colliding head-on with 20th and 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Changing how we make electricity gets easier if we need less of it. Today, most of it is wasted, and the efficiency technologies keep improving even faster than they're applied, so the potential savings keep getting even bigger and cheaper. But as buildings and industries start to get efficient faster than they grow, America's electricity use could start shrinking despite the extra use for electrified autos. And we can do this by reasonably accelerating existing trends. Over the next 40 years, for example, our buildings, which I'll remind you use 3/4 of our electricity, can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, saving $1.4 trillion net present value with a 33% internal rate of return. The savings are worth 4 times what they cost. And industry can also accelerate, doubling its energy productivity with a 21% internal rate of return. A disruptive innovation from our little black swan hatchery that we call integrative design can do even better. because it often makes big energy savings cost less than small ones, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how the retrofit we designed in 2010 with Johnson Controls and Jones Lang LaSalle is saving 2/5 of the energy in the Empire State Building, remanufacturing its 6,500 windows on site into super windows that let light through but block heat, plus better lights and office equipment and so on, cut the maximum cooling load by 1/3. And then renovating smaller chillers instead of adding bigger ones saved over $17 million in capital cost, helping pay for the other improvements and cutting the payback time to just 3 years. Some other retrofits we've been working on are saving as much as 70%. That's good news for cogeneration opportunities in the buildings. It's also probably a worthy competitor to new district energy infrastructure. So it changes the economics of several things that you do. And one of the big competitors to keep in mind is simply eliminating space cooling and heating needs. Here's my own house high in the Rocky Mountains where temperatures used to dip as low as -47 F, -44 C. This helped inspire the 32,000 European passive buildings that likewise need no heating but cost about normal to build. And they don't need to look like this to work like this. Now, if we come into the atrium in the middle of the building, this is what it looked like this February. You can see 2 of the 5 banana crops that are ripening in there. We've so far got 42 of them with no furnace. In 1984, this house was saving 99% of its normal space and water heating energy and 90% of its electricity, all with a 10-month payback. Today's technologies, which we've just retrofitted, are even better. I'll be able to tell you how much better when we're through commissioning the measuring software that's monitoring several hundred data streams. Although it appears that the monitoring equipment, efficient though it is probably using a little more energy than the lights and appliances we're measuring. And this design approach works in any climate. It's been used to eliminate air conditioning up to at least 115 F or 46 C with lower construction cost and better comfort. It was used in a new house in Bangkok to cut air conditioning needs by 90% with superior comfort and normal construction cost. Probably about everybody in the world lives in a climate somewhere between Old Snowmass, Colorado and Bangkok. The key is integrative design that gives multiple benefits from single expenditures. For example, the white arch running along the top of the photograph has 12 different functions, but only one cost. Integrative design can also increase the $500 billion of conventional energy savings in industry. Dow, for example, has already captured over $9 billion of those savings on a $1 billion investment. But there is more to do. For example, 3/5 of the world's electricity runs motors. Half of that runs pumps and fans. And those devices can be improved, and the motor systems that turn them can save about half their energy by integrating 35 improvements that together pay back in about a year. But first, we ought to be capturing bigger and cheaper savings that are normally ignored, are not in any official study, and are not in the engineering textbooks. Let's take the example of pumps, the biggest use of motors. I dare say all of you have pumps. Pumps move liquids through pipes. A typical industrial pumping loop, though, was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps and motors, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. This also shrinks the pumping equipment and its capital costs. So this isn't about new technology, but about rearranging our metal furniture in design, as designers, making 2 changes in design mentality. And the first of those is to use big pipes and small pumps rather than small pipes and big pumps. The friction in a pipe, of course, goes down as nearly the 5th power of diameter. So how fat should the pipe be to optimize its friction? The engineering textbooks say, make the pipe just as fat as will repay its greater cost over the years from the saved pumping energy. This sounds perfectly logical. You don't want to pay more than it's worth, do you? but it's methodologically wrong because it leaves out the capital cost of the pumping equipment. The pump, motor, inverter, electricals all have to be big enough to overcome the friction, so their size and roughly their capital cost will go down as nearly the fifth power of the pipe diameter, but the cost of the fatter pipe will go up as only about the second power of diameter. So when we optimize the pipe by itself as a component, we're pessimizing the system. If we optimize the whole thing, we'll use fatter pipes, teensy little pumps and motors, and the whole system will cost less. This is analogous, by the way, to the change we made in designing my own house. The engineering textbooks say if you're in a cold place, how much insulation should you put in your house? Just the amount that will pay for itself over the years from the saved heating energy. Wrong. They left out the capital cost of the heating equipment. So as you add more insulation, the marginal cost of the saving goes up geometrically. That's how insulation works. Until you get to the point that the economic theorists forgot to tell you about, where suddenly you no longer need the furnace, ducts, fans, pipes, pumps, wires, controls, fuel supply arrangements, and the capital cost went down, in this case, to $1,100 less than if we'd done nothing and just built the code. And why get there the long way around when you can tunnel straight through the cost barrier by saying, how can we design this building without mechanicals, without needing heat? Well, back to pumping, the second big change in the design mentality, is to lay out the pipes first, then the equipment. Normally we do it the other way. We put the tanks and boilers and so on in some arbitrary, traditional, convenient place and then call in the pipe fitters and say, please come connect A to B. But by then A and B are rather far apart. There's other stuff that got in between. They're at the wrong height. They face the wrong way. And by the time the pipe snakes its way all the way across, all dressed at neat right angles like they teach us in trade school, and the spec says orthogonal pipe layout, and the CAD-CAM routine only does orthogonal pipe layout. Guess what? You have 3 to 6 times the friction you would have had with a straight shot. Now the pipe fitters think this is wonderful. You pay them by the hour. They're marking up a margin on the extra pipes and fittings. They're not paying for your bigger pumping equipment or your bigger electric bill forever after. But for you as owner, it's more intelligent to have fat, short, straight pipes than skinny, long, crooked pipes. So in this case, this industrial pumping loop, we got a 7-fold or greater saving in pumping energy, lower total capital cost, and as a free bonus, 70 kilowatts less heat loss with a 2-month payback because it was a lot easier to insulate short, straight pipes. But belatedly, I realized there were 8 additional benefits we hadn't counted and should have. And if we'd done that, we would have saved even more, probably upwards of 96%. So a nice example, sorry, we'll do better next time, of how you need to count all of the real benefits. And this isn't complicated, it's really just good old Victorian engineering rediscovered. For example, how often do we see a critical pump with an in-place spare pump laid out like this, so the flow always goes through 2 right-angle bends, therefore friction? Why not lay them out instead like this so the main flow has no bends and also fewer valves? And the same logic, of course, applies with identical helper pumps in tandem. And consider how we bring water back from a cooling tower to the condenser. If we lay it out conventionally, it looks kind of like this. If we lay it out the way ASHRAE fellow Peter Rumsey does, it looks like that, and everything gets better. Why don't we do it that way? Just force of habit. In fact, Peter took the condenser loop at the Oakland Museum in California and retrofitted it to cut out 3/4 of the pumping energy with a 1 or 2 month payback as a retrofit. And he also eliminated, as you see on the left, 15 pumps that will never again waste energy and maintenance costs. And when I recently applied similar practice in my own house, where we were putting in a little hydronic distribution piping for the 1% of space heating that's active solar, I saved about 97% of the pumping energy and at lower capital cost. So what does such savings mean for the electricity that in the world is about 3/5 used for motors? Well, from the fuel, say coal, burned in the power plant, through all these compounding losses in the power and pumping system, you lose 90%. Only a tenth of the original fuel energy actually comes out the pipe as flow. But now let's turn those compounding losses around backwards into compounding savings from right to left. And every unit of flow or friction that we save in the pipe compounds back to save 10 units of fuel and cost and pollution and climate change back at the power plant. And of course, as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper. So our engineering teams have lately found such snowballing energy savings in over $30 billion worth of industrial redesigns, from data centers and chip fabs to mines and refineries. And typically our retrofit designs in 29 sectors so far are saving about 30 to 60% of the energy with 2 or 3 year paybacks, while our new facility designs save about 40 to 90% with our marketplace winners today. Some wind contracts were written last year in the U.S. for 3 cents a kilowatt hour levelized, net of a 1 cent production tax credit. A couple of months ago, California's photovoltaic auction cleared at an average of 8.9 cents a kilowatt hour, even though our first quarter installed system costs for photovoltaics were twice those of Germany in the second quarter. Last year, the global clean energy sector invested its trillionth dollar since 2004. And this is shaping our next economy. Europe actually already has 1.1 million renewable energy jobs they didn't used to have. Germany is now getting more energy from renewables than from coal or gas or nuclear. They have more solar workers than America has steel workers. In fact, even though this country last year added less photovoltaic capacity than Germany added in a single peak month, even America now has more solar or wind power workers than we have steel workers, or than we have workers in the entire coal value chain end to end. Already in about 20 states, private installers can put those cheap photovoltaics on your roof with no money down and guarantee to beat your utility bill. Such unregulated products could ultimately add up to a virtual utility that could bypass the electric company much as cell phones bypassed wireline phone companies. This sort of thing gives utility executives the heebie-jeebies, and it gives venture capitalists sweet dreams. This kind of competition is becoming big. Half of the world's new generating capacity added each year starting in 2008 has been renewable, the majority lately in developing countries. Last year, 2/3 of Europe's new capacity was solar and wind power. In fact, solar pulled ahead. And the world became able last year to make 50 gigawatts of solar cells every year. That number's been going up 60 or 70% a year. This is not a fringe activity anymore. Renewables, except big hydro, got last year alone $225 billion of private investment and added 84 gigawatts. So the non-hydro renewables last year surpassed by 50% the total installed capacity of nuclear power worldwide. And nuclear's dwindling annual net additions actually went negative after Fukushima. Now the pipeline feeding those net additions, the order pipeline for worldwide nuclear and indeed coal plants, continues to fade because they cost too much and they have too much financial risk. In the U.S., no new nuclear unit has been able to raise private construction capital despite 7 years of 100+% construction subsidies. So without new nuclear build, how else could the U.S. replace its 490 or so coal-fired power plants? Well, efficiency in gas can displace them all at below just their operating cost. And that's already well underway. From 2005 to 10, coal lost 1/4 of its share of the U.S. electricity services market, which is 95% of its total market. We could also displace all the coal plants over 23 times with a mixture of efficiency, gas, and renewables at less than their replacement cost, but you only need to replace them once. We're often told, though, that only coal and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, whereas photovoltaics and wind are variable and hence supposedly unreliable. But actually, there's no such thing as a 24/7 power plant. They all break. And when a giant unit fails, you just lost a gigawatt in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. So it's fortunate that grids for over a century have been designed to handle this intermittence routinely by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, grids can handle the forecastable variation of solar and wind power. That is, largely or wholly renewable grids can deliver highly reliable power when they're forecasted, integrated, and diversified, both by type and by location. This is true for continental areas like the US or Europe. On the 15th of June, the National Renewable Energy Lab published a very important study detailing reliable and economically interesting 80 or 90% renewable power for the US in 2050. But the same is also true for smaller areas embedded within a larger grid. And let me give you an example from ERCOT, more or less Texas, in 2050, where the forecast load shape looks like this. And if you apply efficiency techniques that the National Academy 3 years ago considered highly profitable, then the load gets smaller and less peaky. Now, if you put in enough wind power and solar power to meet 86% of the annual requirement for electricity, you can see it's not a great match to the net load shape. You can get the other 14% from other renewables. All the others are dispatchable, like geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, and feedlot biogas burned in existing combustion turbines. Now, you then have 100% renewable supply, but it's still not a perfect match to the load shape. But you can then match it to the load by using excess electricity for ice storage, air conditioning, either individual or district, and smart charging of electrified autos, and then recover that energy from the distributed storage when you need it, and you can fill the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. And in this scenario, only about 5% of the annual renewable generation in this hourly dispatch simulation is surplus to requirements and has to be spilled. So the economics are actually quite good. Now, in America, we have, I'm sorry, go back one. I apologize, I lost a slide in here somewhere. But just to emphasize this point, we already have operators around the world starting to run their grids in much this way, choreographing these variable renewable resources. 4 German states in 2010 were 43 to 52% wind powered on an annual basis. And Portugal was 45% renewable powered. Denmark, for an average wind year, was 36% renewable powered. And these kinds of experiences, learning how to run their assets in this new way, now make it quite realistic to envisage a whole European Union that runs on renewables in the coming decades. Now, in this country, we've got an aging, dirty, and insecure electricity system that has to be replaced anyway by 2050. And whatever we replace it with is going to cost about $6 trillion net present value. Whether we build more of what we've got, or new nuclear and so-called clean coal, or centralized renewables, or more distributed renewables. But those 4 futures, all costing essentially the same, differ profoundly in their risks around national security, fuel, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. 7 kinds of risk. For example, our over-centralized grid is vulnerable to cascading and potentially economy-shattering blackouts caused by solar storms, bad space weather, or other natural disasters, or physical or cyber attack. But that blackout risk disappears, and all the other risks are best managed with distributed resources, particularly distributed renewables, reorganized into local microgrids that normally interconnect richly but can stand alone at need. That is, they can split apart fractally and reconnect seamlessly. And they're islandable, as indeed my house is. I don't even know when the power goes off because the whole house is like an uninterruptible power supply. This is exactly where the Pentagon is headed with its own power supply because they need their stuff to work. How about the rest of us whom they're defending? We need our stuff to work too. And if this netted islandable microgrid approach that has been used successfully in places ranging from Denmark to Cuba, has 20 or so microgrid experiments around the world, some outstanding ones like UC San Diego. If that were pursued nationwide at about the same cost as business as usual, this resilient grid architecture would maximize our security and customer choice and entrepreneurial opportunity and innovation. Now together, efficient use and diverse dispersed renewable supply are starting to transform the whole electricity sector. Traditionally, of course, utilities would build giant coal and nuclear plants and a bunch of big gas plants and maybe a little efficiency in renewables. And those utilities were rewarded, as they still are in 36 of the United States, in all of Europe, and most of the world, for selling you more electricity. But now, especially where regulators are instead starting to reward cutting your bills, the market is shifting massively towards efficiency, renewables, combined heat and power, and ways to blend them all together reliably with less transmission and little or no bulk electricity storage. Our analysis found that at least 187 gigawatts of industrial cogeneration would be profitable and installable by 2050 versus about 78 gigawatts reported a couple of years ago. Very conservatively, our analysis omitted the entire CHP potential in buildings for lack of good data on its potential and cost. And for the same reason, we also omitted solar process heat, even though some of it's already in the money. But it is logical to expect that besides the low and medium temperature solar cogeneration already entering the market, I saw one example in the exhibition downstairs, I think we'll also see high temperature solar cogen adapted from today's concentrating solar power technologies. Nor did our analysis count the potential to sell industrial waste heat off-site within affordable distances. That has a potential to save about 30% of our industrial energy or 11% of our total national energy use. And together, these assumptions mean that we've conservatively overstated the long-term demand for natural gas. Of course, we're told that the big new wild card in U.S. energy is a flood of cheap natural gas from fracking shale. This graph shows the abysmal track record in forecasting wellhead gas prices over the past quarter century by comparing the actual prices in orange or brown with the official forecasts in various years in blue. 3 times just in the past 15 years, investors have lost immense sums by believing those forecasts, including once losing over $100 billion on mistimed combined cycle plants. Now, we're told that this time it will be different. But basic financial economics tells us that in reality, frac gas is not cheap, it's only misdescribed. To compare it fairly with an asset like efficiency or renewables that has no fuel, hence no fuel price volatility, you must add to the gas's bare commodity cost the long-term value of its price volatility. That roughly doubles its effective price. Consistent with this, the futures market tells us that a decade out, gas costs about $6 or $7, not $2 or $3. That's partly because markets equilibrate. If you want $6 or $8 gas, just assume $3 or $4 gas and use it accordingly. But it's also because the futures market is recognizing that fracking has about 8 important risks or uncertainties that will take at least a decade to resolve. If they all turn out well, we'll be glad to have more and cheaper gas than we used to think. But if not, we won't be unduly disappointed because we won't need all that gas anyway. History also suggests, by the way, that if abundant fracked gas were consistently cheap at the wellhead, it would tend to create supply-demand imbalances, both through global trade and through downstream infrastructure constraints that would paradoxically tend to increase gas's price volatility to gas customers. So there is an important new reality of abundant and stably priced resources for the long haul, but that story is more about efficiency and renewables than it's about natural gas. So abundant and affordable are those inexhaustible and carbon-free resources that our energy future is indeed not fate but choice, and that choice is very flexible. In 1976, for example, government and industry all insisted that the energy needed to make $1 of GDP could never go down, and it was considered heretical when I suggested in an article in Foreign Affairs that it could drop several-fold. Well, here's what actually happened. It dropped by half so far, and yet today's far more powerful technologies and integrative design and maturing delivery channels and financing methods can save another threefold, even cheaper. To solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it. And the results may at first seem incredible, but as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries are protected, he said, by public incredulity. Now, combine the electricity and oil revolutions, and we have the really big story, reinventing fire, where business enabled and sped by smart policies in mindful markets can lead the U.S., for starters, and other countries, completely off oil and coal by 2050, saving $5 trillion, growing the economy 2.6-fold, strengthening our security, and by eliminating oil and coal, reducing fossil carbon emissions by 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any of those outcomes, any one or more, you can support reinventing fire without needing to like all of them and without needing to agree about which of them is most important. So focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to our energy challenge. Those best buys are also the most effective solutions to big global problems that hazard every society's security and prosperity. Our team at the nonprofit Rocky Mountain Institute helps smart companies to get unstuck and speed this journey via 6 sectoral initiatives with more hatching. Of course, there's still a lot of old thinking out there too. As former oilman Maurice Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But as Edgar Woolard reminded us when he chaired DuPont, firms hampered by old thinking, he said, won't be a problem because they simply won't be around long term. What I've described here is not just a once-in-a-civilization business opportunity. It's also one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species. We humans are inventing a new fire, not dug from below, but flowing from above. Not scarce, but bountiful. Not local, but everywhere. Not transient, but permanent. Not costly, but free. And but for the transitional tail of natural gas and a little biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless. Efficiently used, it really can do our work without working our undoing. Each of you owns a piece of that $5 trillion opportunity, and our book, Reinventing Fire, details how each of you can capture that opportunity, who needs to do what in each sector. So with the conversation just begun at reinventingfire.com, and if you'd like to review some other things, the TED Talk and the Foreign Affairs article that I mentioned, let me invite you to engage with us and with each other through this association and otherwise to help make the world richer, fairer, cooler, and safer by together reinventing fire. Thank you.
Thank Thank you very much, Amory. And looking at my watch, I see we have time for a couple of questions. And I think you've really set the agenda for our conference. Very thought-provoking, very engaging, and frankly encouraging that we can move forward. There are 2 microphones in the center aisle. And of course, Mark.
Thank you very much, Amory. I thought it was a fascinating look at very complex challenges, elegantly presented. And you sort of allude to it in your concluding remark about basically take a look at the book about how we can get there. But I would appreciate your thoughts about really, from a policy perspective, how we do get there. You had indicated in the beginning, well, we don't really need to get Congress involved in this thing, but I'm very curious to know how we can really effect the sort of changes that you see.
Well, there are some important changes going on administratively at a federal level, especially in FERC, which is opening up the electric grid to fair competition at transparent prices. And I think we will see a lot more of that. We will even probably see transmission competed fairly against demand response, end-use efficiency, and distributed generation. And then it's anybody's guess how much transmission we can free up or not need to build. There are probably some things that you would like to see Congress do, like extend to your kinds of systems the master limited partnership advantages that oil and gas gets. Certainly that kind of symmetry would be valuable. I wouldn't hold your breath. The folks that get subsidies tend to like them and claim they're not subsidies. Although I guess if you offered to take them away, you would find out quickly that they are highly valued. However, the policy innovations that we found were really necessary to enable or speed the innovations I described can be done administratively or at a state level, which is where practically all the barrier busting needs to be done to permit combined heat and power to compete fairly. And similarly, the big utility reform of rewarding gas and electricity providers for cutting your bill, not selling you more energy, has to be done at a state level. We've only done it now for about 14 states for electricity and 20 for gas, but I think much as gas companies got behind it much more enthusiastically when they started suffering demand destruction and wanted to protect their revenues through a decoupling mechanism, we're starting to see the same stampede in the electricity business as they see stagnating or declining demand, and that shrinks their domain of financial stability, and they also start to realize then that small, fast, granular investments, not big, slow, lumpy ones, are a very good financial risk management tool. There are other important barrier bustings that need to be done at a state level. The most obvious is the fee bates for efficient new autos, not so relevant directly to your business, but indirectly because of what electrification can bring to grid integration. But I would not assume that we can't do anything until Congress instructs us what unnatural act to commit in the marketplace. There is $5 trillion on the table. That is plenty of incentive for smart entrepreneurial business leaders to get on with the job. And they typically will have more influence at a state level where they're not so busy fighting each other. I think that's where I would probably concentrate my effort until I hope ultimately the political fog clears in Washington. And I wouldn't assume that that will happen anytime soon.
What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities relative to district energy towards meeting the goals that you laid out?
Well, I think there's an obvious question in the competition between making buildings so efficient they don't need heating and cooling delivered to them or delivering it through district energy. I've long been an enthusiast for district energy, and I've actually helped design systems up to 92% system efficiency, although I'm told somebody else later did 93. But it is really a case-by-case call whether you're better off putting your money into making the building super efficient or putting in infrastructure to deliver a stream of space conditioning services. Unquestionably, if you're making thermal electricity, you should look seriously at cogeneration with any technology at any scale. So that's kind of a no-brainer, and that actually tends to get simpler. The thermal electric balancing tends to get simpler, and the whole value proposition improves as the building gets more efficient. Even though you're saving electricity as well, you're saving so much of the peakiness of any residual space conditioning loads that your ratios tend to improve, your seasonality tends to improve. And I would therefore urge you in your business models to always bundle efficiency first at the end use and building level with your combined heat and power systems. CHP is a critical ingredient of microgrids and provides a lot of the flexibility that helps them integrate the varying photovoltaic and wind input and still sustain critical loads even if cut off from the main grid. This is, by the way, where I mentioned Denmark has been evolving with what they call a cellular grid, and every year they stress test it by disconnecting the cells, the microgrids, from the main grid to make sure the critical loads still work, which they do. The obstacles that you face legally and administratively from power-only monopolists and not being allowed to sell your services everywhere you want to is, I think, a somewhat separate issue from the design and business model questions, but they're all related, and the stronger business case you can make and the more good projects you get in the ground proving out that value, the stronger political case you have for removing obsolete constraints that prevent you from doing what makes sense. I haven't seen an update from Tom Kasten's original lists of what barriers to bust legally, but I presume your association is keeping up on that and making it state-specific where necessary. And I think it's just good competitive practice to allow all ways to save or produce energy and energy services to compete fairly at honest prices, regardless of their type, technology, size, location, or ownership. It's pretty much the opposite of the energy policy we have in most places. But who would be against that? Wouldn't it be interesting to find out and smoke out some of the corporate socialists masquerading as free marketeers and just trying to protect their monopoly or monopsony?
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and this is the doctor of destroying pumps. Hemant Mehta has put more pumps to rest than anyone in this room. Hemant?
Good.
Thank you very much. You have a great vision, and I really admire what you have done for our planet. I think it's a very, today is the first one that I really enjoyed the whole lecture from the beginning to the end. Normally, that's not the case most of the time. We are too obese in utilizations, like this hotel right now. Many of us over here, I'm sure that some of them left the lights on, some of them left the TV on. So no matter how much we improve on the energy generation and distribution, but till we fix the culture of utilizations, we will be way behind in energy. We have millions of dollars investment in district energy, but the operators we hire, they have no knowledge of the system, and they are under the fear. They operate under the fear that, okay, my surgical room must be cold all the time. So they are always running everything, and they talk about what happened to Red Sox or Yankees or whatever. So how do we change that culture? Till we do that, they are there 24/7, 365 days, and I believe by changing the culture, we can reduce the energy for more than half. Thank you, sir. I'd like to hear your comments on that.
It hardly needs comment. It was an eloquent and correct statement of another whole set of opportunities. And there's a lot of important work going on now on energy and behavior as the social scientists start to focus on this. Let me just give you a notion of the complexity of the issue. There is a field invented a few decades ago by Willard Kempton and Lauren Lutzenheiser called energy anthropology. Imagine this experiment, which was actually done. Take some apartments in New Jersey where it's hot and muggy in the summer, put nobody in them, and measure the air conditioner runtime as a function of outdoor ambient dry bulb. And the points scatter neatly on a line, thus validating the engineering theory of thermostats. Now put people in the apartments and tell them that the air conditioner and the electricity are free. How would you expect them to behave? Well, an economist would probably say they'll turn on the air conditioner when they feel hot and they'll set the thermostat at a temperature which they feel comfortable. Want to guess what fraction of people actually behave that way? It's about 25 to 35%. The points on the graph are absolutely scattered and jumbled. There's no correlation with anything. So the anthropologists then observed the people's behavior carefully and interviewed them, open-ended ethnological interviews, and find out what was going on in their heads. And it turned out that the air conditioning behavior was very little related to comfort, statistically not at all. It was driven by household schedules, folk theories about how air conditioners work, like most even technically informed households think the thermostat is a valve that makes the cold come out faster. Folk theories about health and physiology, general strategies for dealing with machines, like in our culture, if you turn a knob clockwise, it makes something happen more or faster, noise aversion, and wanting white noise to mask outside sounds that might wake the baby. So these higher primates are quite complicated. I mean, if you're a utility load dispatcher, air conditioning is the load from hell. It makes the needles go to the right on hot days, and you can correlate it with outdoor dry bulb and maybe wet bulb and income. But there are no people out there. If you are a comfort theorist, there are people out there. They have bodies and no brains. They are ambulatory watery sacks of 1.84 or something square meters surface area. And they're 70 kilogram adult white males, and they have an index of skin wettedness, predicted mean vote, predicted percent dissatisfied, and so on. And if the 6 physical variables in the Founder comfort equation are satisfied, the people say they're happy. By the way, this has not a whole lot to do with reality when you dig in further. If you're an econometrician, there are people out there, and they have brains and no bodies. They are disembodied marginal cost benefit calculating machines. They have utility functions, hedonic indices, price and income elasticities, discount rates, and all that. If you are a cultural anthropologist, there are people out there, and they have bodies and brains and maybe souls, and they are complex bundles of needs, wishes, hopes, fears, beliefs, myths, all conditioned by history and culture. Well, it turns out that model has more predictive power than the others put together, even though it itself is not complete. And we're learning now something we learned actually first in social science in desegregating the armed forces in the 1950s. Behavior drives attitude, not the reverse. So absolutely, if you want to get the best performance for people and making them happier, healthier, more productive, you have to understand what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how they are using energy. It's kind of like when you're dealing with the mechanics of the building. You all know that a bad building, well run and maintained, will probably outperform good equipment, badly operated and maintained. But it's the same with people. And we all know from the literature we can save about 15% of our energy without complaint, without discomfort, just by working with people. But there are a lot of design strategies that will help with this too. And one of the reasons I'm particularly fond of underfloor ventilation or distribution with, say, Krantz diffusers or whatever, is to give people that optionality to control their own systems, because people are so immensely diverse much more actually than the comfort equation indicates, especially in a diverse workforce. You will have large percentages of people dissatisfied in any building until you give them individual control and until they understand how the building works enough that they can make it meet their needs, which will vary from time to time. We need to use the full vocabulary of comfort influencers, interior finishes, which influence how you perceive comfort, contrary to the comfort equation. You can make people feel cooler by putting a picture of an icy blue waterfall on the wall. Air movement, sextuple efficiency, ceiling fans, that sort of thing. Radiant temperature with super windows. This is a much bigger palette of opportunities than simply adjusting dry bulb and wet bulb. And I think that is the next big frontier in building comfort sensation. Just remember that when people feel thermally comfortable and can see what they're doing, hear themselves think, breathe cleaner air, they will do in an office, say, about 6 to 16% more and better work. That's an order of magnitude more valuable to the bottom line of the occupant than eliminating the entire energy bill. There are enormous positive externalities from providing true comfort and helping people feel and be in control of their comfort environment. So that is an economic and not just a psychological or approval frontier. Thank you.
Well, I'd like for you to join me in thanking Amory for his time, for visiting with us, for really sharing some thoughts. I think he's given us a lot to absorb, and I really appreciate his helping us to reinvent fire and move forward. And Amory, on behalf of IDA, have a small token of appreciation. It's actually quite small, but I want to thank you for spending time with us and sharing your vision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.